As some of you may know, we are the CGT 411-450 group Magma. Introducing the team members, I'm Thomas Gick. This is Peter West, Amanda Marco, and Justine Bowden. We'd like to start by thanking everyone for coming. Our sponsor, Larry Gustafson, and our advocate, Professor Burton. And we'd just like to thank you for giving us the opportunity for working with you, letting us develop a set of instructions that we feel will give your company the edge in making efficient and cost-effective installations possible without errors and giving your company a better brand name. We will be sharing with you our product, the reason we created it, as well as our research findings, our research question and methodology, and a summary of our opinions about the data and the opportunity for further research.
We would like to begin today by reading to you our elevator statement so that you can understand what our product is and where we wanted to go with it. For heating, ventilation, and air conditioning companies, technicians being trained to install new products would benefit from a training application that takes into account their learning styles. Unlike traditional instructional methods that use mostly text or diagrams, this application will incorporate multiple ways of presenting information in order to accommodate multiple learning styles, which could, as a result, increase memory retention.
Our case study was the instructions for LETS, which stands for Latent Energy Transfer System. It is a new product invented by our sponsor, and it's basically a heat pump that directly gets its energy out of the ground. And the reason the name Latent Energy Transfer System came about is because it actually freezes the ground while it's getting the energy out, and gets the latent energy from the water to put heat into the house, doing it very cost effectively. So for the initial problem we were looking at how to effectively create instructions for the installation of this device. And it's important that it gets properly installed and the instructions are clearly conveying that. And one of the challenges we faced as we were working on the problem is, as we worked on how to effectively create these instructions, the process that we were making instructions for was changing because of how new the product is and them still working out the kinks of how to install it. To illustrate the basic problem we're looking at, we can use the Shannon-Weaver model of communication. And basically, we're the sender of the information source trying to give the instructions to the people being installing it, who will be the receiver and the destination. And we had already determined that the basic channel we were wanting to use was an online instruction to be cost effective. And so our big problem is, how do we encode these online instructions or make them in such a way that when they are viewed by the receiver or used, they will decode it and continue to have the same meaning that we put into them when we were making them. So basically the big challenge is, how do we make it so they get out of it what we're trying to put into it? And the feedback we'll get is initially off our test now, and once there's actual instructions in the field, whether or not they're putting the stuff in correctly. From our problems, we made a concise problem statement that is verbose or obscure instructions in the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning industry can often lead to improper installation of new units, resulting in failure and inefficiency.
Okay, now I'd like to go over some of the research we found that's related to our product. One of the topics we looked into is the delivery method of instructions, since one of our goals is to effectively communicate these installation procedures. So one of the sources we found, Gareth, described an experiment that tested the build times of subjects using text instructions, static diagram instructions, or animations. And the results showed that the text-only information was much slower than the build times for the other two methods, and that there was no significant difference between the animations and the static diagrams. Another article by Keller and several others described an experiment to test if 3D visualizations have any benefit over 2D, and also to determine if color So subjects were given either an Excel chart, a black and white 2D, a black and white 3D, a multicolored 2D, or a multicolored 3D visualization, and then we're tested on the content. The results showed that the 2D visualizations were much more suited for knowledge acquisition, and also that color coding results in slight performance increases. An additional area that we researched is learning styles, because we want our application to be accessible to multiple learning styles. We found an article by Sojka and Geese, which investigated individuals' preferences for visual as opposed to verbal information, and also related those preferences to processing style personality traits. And the results showed that individuals with a high need for cognition prefer to process verbal information, while those with a high need for affect prefer to process visual information. A different article by Smith and Woody compared multimedia and traditional teaching approaches, and they documented an interaction between student learning style and the teaching method, suggesting that multimedia benefits students with a high visual orientation. And in addition, Azon and Zan discussed a case study that involved courseware that teaches mathematics. Basically, this courseware was comprised of a diagnostic module and of instructional modules. And the diagnostic module would automatically adapt the instructions based on the user's initial knowledge on the topic and on their learning style. And the results did show that matching the learning styles to the instructions was effective in enhancing students' learning gains. Another topic that we looked into is memory, since one of our goals is to increase memory retention. Burgess and Hitch concluded that the use of rhythm, repetition, chunks, and lists help to transfer information from the short-term to the long-term memory. Additionally, Karpik and Roediger discussed 2 experiments studying the effects of testing on multi-trial free recall. Subjects basically learned a list of words and either were repeatedly studied or were given test trials before the final recall test 1 week later. And they found that repeated testing increased retention over repeated studying. However, alternating study and test trials produced the best results. So they concluded that the key to long-term retention is the repeated retrieval of information.
Throughout the course of the semester, we have defined many different terms, and as a group, we feel that the important ones to mention are long-term memory, working memory, and learning styles. Long-term memory is defined by Cherry as information that is largely outside of our awareness, but can be called into working memory to be used when needed. Working memory is referred to by Badley as a brain system that provides temporary storage and manipulation of the information necessary for such complex cognitive tasks as language comprehension, learning, and reasoning. And lastly, we define learning style as characteristics of cognitive, affective, and psychological behaviors that serve as indicators of how learners perceive, interact with, and respond to the learning environment, as stated by Bradley. After many revisions and edits, the research question we finally came to and approved of is, how can the use of multiple media forms and repeated retrieval during training of the installation of new products in the HVAC industry increase memory retention?
Our hypothesis was that the web application that we created, which uses multiple types of media and repeated retrieval during training, would increase the memory retention of installation tasks. So alternatively, our null hypothesis was that our web application would have no effect on memory retention.
And for our methodology, we tested this on college students, mostly because of the limitations of the semester, and we were going to be doing a written test instead of an installation test because there's not enough units yet and the amount of time required. And we determined they would be a good analogy. Our mode of delivery is we made 2 computer-based instructions, one that was using an increased amount of multimedia, quizzes throughout it, and repetition, and then one that was using more of static text. When the participants came in to take the study, they were randomly assigned by the computer to one of the 2 groups, and then would be given that training. Then to measure how much they learned and their memory retention, at the end of it, both groups were given the same quiz, and then we brought them back 3 days later to give them another quiz, which is identical between both groups as well. And we collected data throughout while we were taking the quizzes and on which group they were. And each person was assigned a random number at the end of the first day of testing that they had to bring back and enter into the computer at the second day of testing so we could match up the first quiz and the second quiz to see the memory retention from the first test and the training to 3 days later.
After we completed our testing and our product, we realized that we had several problems with it. Originally, we wanted to do testing on actual HVAC technicians, but we realized that if we wanted to do that, it would take several hours just to test one subject. So then we decided to just test college students, and more specifically, we just aimed it for College of Technology students because they'd be easier to get a hold of. We decided to test them on the different instructional platforms, and after agreeing on this testing method, the challenges that we then ran into were that we were having a hard time getting a sufficient number of participants, and the other obstacle that we had was getting the participants who came on the first day to return for the second day.
For our testing, we had 24 participants come for the first part, which consisted of the instructions and of test 1. And then we had 14 return a couple days later for test 2. And the individuals in group A viewed the experimental version of the instructions, and group B viewed the control version, so the more traditional type of instructions. Both groups were given the same test 1 and test 2. Each was out of 20 multiple choice questions, and the tests were over the same content, but the questions weren't identical between the two tests because we wanted to avoid testing a straight memorization of the questions and answers. Also, subjects were not given the correct answers after either test because if they had seen the results of test 1, then that would influence how they performed on test 2. And we measured each subject's scores, and the graphs show the average is of group A and group B for both of the tests. And as you can see for test 1, group A scored higher with an average of 14.07 out of 20, while group B had an average of 11 out of 20. And for test 2, the average of group A was 14.375 out of 20, which was still higher than group B, which had an average of 13.5 out of 20.
After finishing our testing and meeting with our statistical consultant, Remy, we came to the conclusion that there was no difference in the memory retention. Group A, however, recorded a higher initial score, but Group B showed more improvement between test 1 and test 2. And the conclusion we came to, however, was that we didn't have enough test subjects returning for the second part to gather accurate data to measure the retention. But we were able to show that Group A performed better on test 1.
Some of our opinions on the data was that the experimental group, like Justine said, they scored higher on the first test, but they also scored higher on the second test. It's just that the group B showed more improvement between the two tests. Like she said again, with more test subjects, we believe that we could show that the memory retention between the two groups was significant, and we would also like to observe the actual installation with the training of the two different versions to get more data in the future.
Okay, and so where this would go in the future? We think that one thing is a lot of these technicians are going to be haptic learners, and making it not just a media-rich thing to increase learning, but more specifically tailoring it to haptic learners might be able to be done with a multimedia app for a touchscreen device where they actually were moving the stuff and assembling the part on the screen. And we think that there's a potential that might show an increase for haptic learners. And we think that the more interactive version would potentially, for all groups, also show an increase. And we think that a study with more test cases and split out better in the future would help us narrow things down, because we determined that with the the differences we made, the test subjects did better on the first test than the second test. But when we went back through, we didn't have a way to tell. Is it because we gave them quizzes throughout? Is it because we did repetition? Is it because we had more multimedia objects in it? And we know somehow the combination of that made them do better, but with our testing, we had no way to narrow down what the effect of each one individually was.
A little bit about the software and hardware we use to develop and create our product. We used some products from the Adobe Creative Suite, Dreamweaver, Illustrator, and Photoshop. Dreamweaver is a web development application. We combined it with PHP, MySQL, and CSS to create the website and populate a database that would record the user's test results, which we could pull and analyze for our statistics. Illustrator is a vector graphics program, which we use to create a scale representation of what the product would look like in a basement from a front and side view. And then edited images we pulled from AutoCAD 2013, which we got models from Professor Corey, and we then altered them with Photoshop to make it look more understandable and less complex, so that they could understand it, and we broke it down from the exploded view. And so that way, whenever they're looking at our graphics, they're not seeing every piece all exploded, and it can be very confusing. So whenever you break it down into steps of which parts go with which, it's very easy to understand. You break it down in chunks, they remember it better, and they install the product more efficiently. And here are some images of our product. This is one that we pulled straight out of AutoCAD. We did not alter it with Photoshop. You can see an example of this on the brochure. If you look at the images folder, or the images pane, and it's next to one that has been altered with Photoshop to give it a look that it is on the wall. This is where you put it, and there are lines to represent the bricks to give it scale, so you know what size it is, how it's supposed to look before you even see the product. Here is a screen capture of a quiz that they would take during the experimental instructions. As you can see, they have a list of 3 things they're supposed to put in order before they can continue on to the next step in the instructions. Here is just another screenshot of the experimental instructions. As you can see, we broke it down into A, B, C for the chunks, so they know what page they're on, it's highlighted, and they can see all the different steps, where they are at in the process, to give them a better idea of where they're going, where they came from. As we said, we did 2 tests. Here is a screen capture of where they would go on the website to go and take the test. So in the future, if you have a product that's developing, you can make different quizzes, and for each new version of the product, you could have a different test and see how they do with the development of the product, and if they are understanding the instructions, where they're messing up with the errors. And you can pinpoint where that is and take care of the problem. Just once again, like to thank everyone for coming. We are the 411-450 group Magma. I'm Thomas Gake. This is Peter West, Amanda Marco, and Justine Vodi. And thank you all for coming and watching our presentation. Open the floor for questions.
Did anyone proofread your handout?
No.
What kind of research was made available to you before starting this project? And to give some background, I've seen a couple of these projects before, like in CG 411, where they research learning styles and things like that, whether they're doing something like what you're presenting, for an aircraft or whatnot. not, but I'm just wondering, was any research made available to you prior to starting this project so you could, you know, hit the ground running versus spending a majority, or not a majority, but just spending that time doing your own research?
Yes, there was some. We based a lot of our research off of some research from prior groups. We had, unfortunately, some of the discs were missing from the prior groups when I went to get them. Like we got the disc holder, and then where the disc was supposed to be, and then it was empty, or there was a blank disc in one. But we were able to get a couple of those and start our research from some of the older ones. And that was the basis for what we started off with our research.
Talk about this small sample problem. The staff people said that 14, there was no statistical method for looking at small samples and making any kind of inference on it.
It was just hard to find a statistical significance with a small sample size, so with a larger one, we would have more test results that we could pull data from.
And our results were somewhat close together for as small as the sample was. If we potentially made a longer quiz, that we might have been able to show more results as well.
Yeah, so was that their comment that it might be a little, if you made it a little longer? And what number did they give you? What was your target number?
I remember hearing about 30 for each group, so.
But we knew that there'd be a tough
Mhm.
sell getting people to come back, so.
Did you track who your testers were in terms of their background? Like, was there a CET student mostly versus maybe a BCM student who may have a different understanding of the product that you're trying to test them on?
No, we tracked their age and gender, but we didn't take into account their major background on the questionnaire. That when we were going through our results, that was something we realized we should have put in the questionnaire on the computer.
As to what their major was?
Yes, as to what their major was, or if they had any prior experience.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're having problems with people, you know, they take the initial test and you'd have problems with them coming back to take the second test. Would it have been acceptable to say, well, since you've taken the test the first time, you know what it's all about, we can maybe do this virtually where like via like a webcast or something like that, they could go through the steps, or did it require people physically being present at a certain location to do the test?
It didn't actually require people being physically present in a certain location to do the test, because it was actually, we had set it up online through a server, so they could have just put it, if they had their number, they could have logged in remotely to take the second test.
Okay, so were they doing it remotely?
No, they actually ended up coming back into the room to take it. I don't think we told them, some of them that didn't know if they'd come back, where they could take it, but
You don't know if they did?
I don't know if they did, but from the number of people that came back to the room and the number of results we have, I believe that we only actually got people who physically came back to the room taking the second test.
Was there any incentive for people to come back, or was it?
If they came back, we had donuts for them to eat after the test.
Oh.
We provided free food, and we made sure they knew that if they came back, there would be donuts and food there.
Did they keep the donuts and chuck them at them in the hallway when they saw them after they didn't try?
In the results that you displayed for the test 1 and test 2, for test 1 you only displayed the results for the people that came back and took test 2, is that correct?
No, for test, the results we were showing was everyone who
That
took
was
test
everyone
one.
that took test 1.
And then then when we were doing the results of memory retention, we excluded everyone who didn't show up for the second one. We just took the differences between people we had for both of them. Sure.
I guess the data you presented though, the data for test 1, that was everyone that took test 1?
Yes, the data for test 1 was everybody who took test 1.
Okay, so do you think it's fair to correlate that data to the data from test 2 that you display as well, since it's a different test pool?
I think it probably would have been better if we put a third chart in there showing test 1 results with the people that did not come back pulled out.
So the return on investment for your sponsor to, you know, if this was going to be something that they were investing time and money into enhancing this training, I think in your paperwork it said that it would significantly reduce costs, I think it was operating costs. I would imagine like the reason those just instruction manuals are so poor is they're just the cheap cost to produce them. So if you're gonna be, producing higher quality and spending more time and money on that, you'd have a return on investment for your sponsor?
The basic return on investment is if we can get this process working well enough. A lot of instruction is done by people, by apprenticeship, by someone that comes somewhere, gets trained on how to install the unit. Then they have to go places and train a group of people, give a presentation on how to install the unit, and a lot of the cost is of that. And if the online virtual one works efficiently enough, you don't need people going around training people. When a company wants to start installing this, their people can go online and get certified, and you don't have to have them getting certified by an actual person. That's where the savings and benefit would come in.
Also, one of the requirements for this class is that we make contracts with our sponsor. So he has an idea of what we would charge, and I guess it would be up to him to decide, would our process benefit him if it reduces those errors? Because one of the steps is to determine how to insert the pipe into the wall. And if you do it with the wrong method, you can end up tearing the entire wall out, which can really defame you, and you don't want people to sue you for tearing the wall out. So it's really important that some steps are taken a second look at so that they do get it right and you don't have to deal with that sort of mess.
How did you guys decide to reduce the complexity of an image? You received a CAD file, right? And the CAD file was pretty detailed and pretty accurate. So you went to it in Photoshop or something and edited it.
Well, what we did first was in AutoCAD, we broke down the installation into smaller steps so that you wouldn't be seeing the entire exploded view. We would show you how to put the compressor on a plate, and then we would show you the other components that go on after, so that it's not as confusing. As far as how we would determine if it is a superfluous graphic or not, that's something that I believe further research could have been done as another survey to be taken. But we didn't want to bog down the participants with answering too many questions. They may get tired and not want to give their best effort, so we wanted to go straight for the results we wanted and test those.
So what happened when somebody missed a question? When someone missed a question, what happened?
Nothing happened. During when they were doing the training, those intermediate quizzes, it would tell them they missed a question, and it would inform them of the right answer and make them put the correct answer in before they went to the next part.
Not remediate them by going back and seeing the instruction.
No, but
No, but they had the option to click back to see the
Oh,
instruction.
okay.
They
So
needed to
they
click
had-
back to
okay,
answer
okay.
right. And then during the assessments, they were not giving any indication of whether they answered things right or wrong. They give the answers, they hit the button, it would record them and record the answers in the database and take them to the next page, but it would not tell them.
Was there any hierarchy of the questions as to the level of importance to assign values to it, or was it just right or wrong?
It was just right or wrong.
Okay, so the things that you addressed were critical issues. So in other words, the angle of the bore, the amount of the bracket, all of those things, which there is no, option for a wrong answer that the system would work. Is that right? So in other words, the series of questions you developed.
Some of them, some of the questions, there is a potential that it would work right, it just might not go together as snugly or something like.
Okay.
And there probably could have been levels of wrongness on it.
How many instructional environments did you define? How big is this? Is it 25 in a sequence from beginning to end? Is it the chunks?
We had 5 overall steps,
Okay.
and then some of those are broken down into like A, B, C.
Okay.
And the instructions was only on a small part because we knew real compensation, a lot of college students wouldn't be willing to spend
Sure.
a long time on this, so we just took a very small part of the process for our testing and gave those instructions and then did quizzes over that small part.
And, you know, in the trades, there's an awful lot of almost indentured servitude that goes on. Where, you know, you have a plumber, and he has a plumber's helper. And if you look in the trades, it's still there. So, did you find anything in the literature that compared this learning or this teaching technique to that kind of environment? Or were these all standard educational literature things? I mean, did you find anything from a trades union, from their training groups, or, you know, how they train to do any kind of comparison?
We tried to contact local heating and cooling companies to see, you know, how they train, but they were reluctant to answer. So,
Probably
It's
because they
very
didn't have-
difficult to
so
get
we
even
just
one
had to
response.
stick with the more traditional.
So you did try to reach out?
I
we did.
contacted at least 10 of them, and a couple of them here in Lafayette, they were like, oh, well, you need to talk to this person, they're not in yet, they'll be in later in the week, call this day. So I would call back and, oh, no, they're not in today, you have to call again. And I would do that several times, and they just apparently were never in. So I don't know if they were still even
Did you
employed
say you were a
there.
student at Purdue?
Yeah.
Okay, there's the problem. Okay. So is the goal of this to obtain a certification?
Yes.
Okay. So what level of threshold did you decide was effective, or I guess acceptable, to obtain qualification as being certified in this process? Based on just what you,
We didn't really determine a threshold for that. I believe that would take studies where if we're giving an online quiz, I think we would need the people to take it to actually install it and then do a correlation between the scores on the quiz and those installations to see how many of them actually resulted in wrong installations to be able to correlate where you need your certification at.
In the instructions that you provided, did you break it into different steps for each set of instructions, or did you use the same set, the same number of steps with different media provided for those?
Yeah, they're all the same steps, just the way we basically showed them was different.
And I think the
I guess
text
my
was
question
even the
is
same.
it
We just
broke it down
broke
further?
it into smaller parts and
Okay.
put it with more images, objects.
Is it possible for us briefly to see quickly the instruction set?
I'm not sure if the servers up on that for that. So,
I think you can do
I think it did.
I think you can randomly assign settings for everything and get the settings.
Yeah. Yeah, this, it's still kind of set up for testing, but this was the first page that they would come to, which would kind of describe about the training and the product. And you would be able to click, and here are step 1, step 2. And then now you come to the question, which basically has you order the previous steps. And then so it tells you the correct order after that, and then you can continue on. And it's the same thing again. And then this is at the very end, as you do the previous 3 steps, and then you continue, and then you can start for the quiz. And right now we just have quiz 2 up because that's the last one for testing.
So is it an ordering exercise in quiz 2?
Or, well, quiz 1 and quiz 2 are both the 20 multiple choice questions, and like some of the questions do ask about the order.
About the order?
Yeah.
But the questions in the quiz are actually a different format where you don't put things in an order, it's multiple choice on like whether they go in the right order. There's other questions that.
I noticed a lot of text in this. Do you know what the reading level of this population might be?
About
Or
the
education level?
fourth grade, we assume.
Okay, so when I saw that first page, that's, you know, if you look at the data density, it's probably 2/3 words.
The first page didn't really have anything on it that they needed to know. It was basically just what we were doing as the experiment for the testers. That was it.
Was it a disclaimer that you take no responsibility for blinding them or anything?
Well, it wasn't as much a disclaimer, just an explanation that they're going to be presented instructions in that. It
Then
was,
why
And
was-
then, yeah.
If it wasn't need, if it didn't need to be read, why was it there?
Well, it was just so
If they were
that
doing
if they were taking it away from the lab, that they would have some sort of idea of what they're doing and how.
Did you do a reading level analysis of that?
Of the introduction page?
Yeah, any of it. To know if someone was capable of. Okay.
I don't think
So you guys made this part and the quiz as well?
yes.
It's not unlike the certification things that we have to do here at Purdue for FERPA and things like that.
Yeah.
It's really not unlike that, what you've done. And I thought,